Welcome to the Tao of Pizza, where we feature top logistics leaders, entrepreneurs, and supply chain innovators and share their inspiring stories with a holistic twist.
Mark Hiddleson here, host of the Tao Pizza podcast, where I talk with top industry innovators in the warehousing, logistics, and supply chain business with a holistic twist. Before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to mention Vicky Dello-Joyo. I had her on my podcast a few weeks ago. Her energy, she's a master teacher, and Vicky, A Way of Joy is her website. And today I have Dr. Jeremy Weiss here of Rise 25, who's done thousands of interviews with successful entrepreneurs and CEOs. And we flipped the script today, and he'll be interviewing me. Jeremy, welcome to Tao Pizza.
Mark, thanks for having me. I'm excited. You know, each time we chat, we get to talk about the archetypes and how the archetypes relate to business and personal. And so we're going to talk about the integral attunement today and how that relates to business and your personal life and how you kind of run your life off of some of these principles. And before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by Specialized Storage Solutions. And I know anyone who knows you, Mark, you've been in this logistics and storage industry for decades. And you provide industry-leading warehouse storage solutions nationwide. So basically, if someone has a warehouse and they need racks, shelving, carts, conveyors, mezzanines, even design engineering, installations, inspections, repairs, anything, they should call you. If you don't have the answer, you'll find someone who does, because you probably know just about everyone in the industry at this point. Sometimes people don't even realize that you can actually help them with permit acquisition services. So you take a holistic approach, as people can see from the podcast episodes, to someone's entire business. And that kind of goes into what you do as a business, because you work with a supply chain ecosystem, which kind of touches every part of the business. So if someone wants to learn more, they can go to specialracks.com. Give you a call, 707-732-3892. And you even, leave your email address. If podcast listeners have questions, it's markhiddleson@aol.com. So talk a little bit about an integral attunement. And I know we're going to get into the archetypes.
Yeah, so attunement and is kind of, if you I look at humans and as an instrument. It's like tuning an instrument. If you look at all the different things that we can do, we can touch people's lives, we can inspire creativity, create solutions. And right now I look at, sometimes I look at different generations and the problems that we had to solve. And, now I'm looking at the younger generation and I'm going, we did our best, but it's going to take some attunement to what we're really capable as humans, and finding one of the reasons I like the archetypes, and I had to choose when I did this, I wanted to choose something that I've worked with over the years for attunement, and the archetypes is one of them. But it's really integrating the shadow aspects of some of these archetypes, because popular culture, usually you see the archetypes, but it just shows the good side or the bad side. And so even some of the best movies, they make the villain where you can sort of like the villain, like for me. And the clown is one of my favorite archetypes, but I like the Joker, even though he's up to bad things. You look at what he's doing, but all of the archetypes, not like the clown is good and then Don Juan is bad. It's that they all have and all people, the archetypes are as old, they've been through cultures, the stories that we keep telling ourselves, the archetypes keep showing up. And to me, it's helped me as I brought this work, that I've done myself in leadership. And I got a quote here I'm going to read about leadership from Tom Landry. And I went to a football game yesterday, so my voice is a little, I didn't realize until I started talking, but I've got about half of my voice because I've been attuning my my life around this week's archetype, which is the athlete, and not just the athlete, but the dilettante athlete. And I'll go into what dilettante means. It's like the word of the week.
I guess it's fitting that Tom Landry is the quote.
Yeah, the Tom Landry quote. And it's that leadership is getting somebody to do something that they don't want to do to achieve what they want to achieve. And we talked a little about the different archetypes. The Don Juan is sort of the seductive archetype, where you really want to be persuasive to get people to do things. And I love Tom Landry because he was. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, but back when he was coaching, he had this super conservative. He was almost infamously, he was like super Christian, guys. And like, I think of football players when I was in the locker room, like it's pretty loosey goosey in there, right? We're doing stuff and the pranks you pull and the language and everything. But he was a high character, faith-based leadership. And I never saw him speak or anything. He was died before I was old enough, but I saw Mike Ditka give a speech about Tom Landry, and he talked about he found him at a point in his career. He was a big shot football player. And that's one of the things about the athlete. I love the athlete because it has to do with training, using your gifts, developing your physical gifts, and really, going beyond and above training in ways that other people don't. But the shadow of the athlete is kind of a false bravado, right? Like we're the jocks and we can do whatever we want because we're athletes, or there's this bravado, and a lot of it's earned. You go and then you look at these football players, and like, yeah, none of these guys. When we first started going to games, there's a group of business people I go with, and one of the guys is like really buff. Like I'm a bigger guy, but this guy's just like ripped, big. And I would sit in the stands, and we love to watch warm-ups because these guys are going to play a professional football game is 3 hours. Well, they warm up for like 4 hours, to play 20 minutes. But I'd go, hey, would you fight 52? This guy's big martial arts guy and everything. He's like, no, man, I wouldn't fight him. And then it was like how some of the popular players, well, would you fight T.O.? You remember Terrell Owens? Like he was a big, buff, fast guy. I'm like, man, he's so fast, he would kill you. And he said, I'll fight him in a phone booth, which I think was a Muhammad Ali thing. But it's just, it's part of being an athlete. And I think, one of the reasons I like Tom Landry and what Dick has said is, we all thought we were big shots, and he was going to buy a nightclub, and he was going to go into the nightclub industry. And Tom Landry pulled him back into coaching and saying, hey, look, man, you're a high character guy. You're going to be a good coach. People are going to look up to you. And so he really talked Mike Ditka out of going down a life path that might have been different and, influence his life. And then, Ditka went on to coach the Bears, influenced a lot of other. He told good stories about who was the quarterback that had McMahon.
Jim McMahon.
Jim McMahon said it was a Super Bowl, and they had a curfew. Everyone was supposed to be in. No one was supposed to be partying or anything like that. Well, some of the guys obviously had been out partying, and he went in. The game, it was like 7:30 first meetings or whatever, and he sees McMahon, and his eyes were all bloodshot and everything, and he could tell that he had been out, and he was really pissed. And he's like, McMahon, he goes, I don't know if you're apathetic or ignorant, but you don't know what you're doing. And McMahon said, well, I don't know, and I don't give a shit, which is the definition of ignorance and apathy. So, but I don't think he knew what those two words, but I think you can influence with honor is my thing is, getting people to do something they don't want to do kind of sounds like, that's manipulation, or it's leadership. And so for me, a big part of this archetypal project is it's authentic leadership to me, or, authentic innovation, because I'm getting people to think in different ways to accomplish an objective. So I like that definition of leadership is getting people to do things they don't want to do to accomplish something that they do want to accomplish. Because a lot of times you don't know.
And you were going to talk about dilettante.
But dilettante. So dilettante's another word for amateur. So I chose both of these archetypes, and then I've sort of combined them to because I'm not just an amateur athlete, but I like the idea that the dilettante means to delight in, or the Latin root word is to delight in. And so a dilettante is a lover of the fine arts who never rises above the level of amateur, and who the phrase jack of all trades, master of none applies. So the world kind of has a negative, connotation of a dabbler, or, but the nice thing about amateurs for me, I like to get, lost, like sports. It's funny. One of the things I have about life is that you're either in the stands or you're on the field. And I think a lot of this theory and everything, the other thing about the archetypes is that I've applied this to my life and work. I use it for more self-awareness and connecting with people. But the dilettante has allowed me to explore a lot of passions where I'm not an expert. And so I wanted to, for this, because I was thinking about this archetype project, and in the amateur, the dabbling I've been doing is, I'm not a professional psychologist. And this archetypal work is it's based on Carl Jung's work, and tapping into the power of your unconscious. And I have some satori moments, because attunement, I'll get a little bit more into attunement, but attunement is really practicing in all of the aspects of the archetypal path we've talked about, the worldview, attuning your worldview to, basically reality, and with the archetypes, you can have things get away with you, and bringing an awareness to what reality is. And there's a lot of ways to do attunement meditation, deep meditation, focus, concentration. For some people, I've never done like a 3-day silent retreat, but for me, any kind of 3-day, and I try to do it about once a quarter, where you immerse with a group of people led by somebody who's not an amateur. So I'll usually seek out somebody who is an expert on qigong or meditation, or even the shaman. And I haven't done ayahuasca yet, but ayahuasca is on the list of what, now it's becoming popularized, in LSD experiments from the 60s that now are kind of coming back. It's a way of bringing yourself back into, or like an awakening of a new way of looking at things. So I've thought about this over the years, and the awakenings I've had in the psychology realm. When I was at my first satori, I was thinking, wait, when was this time like my reality was just shattered, and something new? And when I was about 5 or 6 years old, there were some kids across the street that had kind of different parenting styles than my parents. My dad was a cop, Vietnam vet, little minor PTSD, anger issues, and the kids across the street, their dad was like, it was like a motorhome salesman or something. It looked exciting, but their dad was smoking a little weed or anything like that, and they had difference. But it was always funner to hang out, more fun to hang out with those guys. And one time we were buying stickers for our bicycles, and these guys were all picking out their stickers, and I picked out this sticker, and it said, "Ass, grass, or gas, nobody rides for free." And I was like 6 years old, and there was a little green plant on it. And so it was awesome. It was like the outline, and then it was in red, and then there was a little green. And the kids were like, yeah, get that one, get that one. So when I had that sticker, and my dad had like custom painted this bike for me, and he got it, out of the impound because he was a cop. But I showed him, I was like, Dad, look it, I got this new sticker for my bike. And he read that sticker. And it's my stepdad. My stepdad was one of those guys, he could just give you a look of terror. And I thought I was going to die, and he didn't even say anything. And I thought it was cool. And it was like, well, I was like, well, is it because it says ass? Like, I didn't think, my parents, I wasn't allowed to like cuss all the time, but ass was something you could say and get away with. And then I just thought it was, and I love rhymes and everything. I mean, I'm not a professional poet, but I mean, ask grass or gas sounded pretty funny to me. My stepdad didn't think it was funny. And it was this feeling in my heart. It was like your whole body, like when your psychology changes, and I'm like, oh my God, this. And I was really too young to explain the weed thing too. I just knew he was pissed off, and something in me had to change. And the other thing had to do with the same. It's a little more funny story, but it's more about something. I mean, I had a friend, Mike Cardoza. We were in kindergarten, and there was a early reading group and a late reading group, and he was in the early reading group, so they'd always leave a little early. And Michael didn't have a bicycle, and he lived nearby, and so I said, "Hey, man." He asked if he could borrow it one time, and I go, "Yeah, like the whole hour that I'm still in school and you're out of school, you could just ride the bike wherever, and then bring it back and ride it home." So he bought this little pad for the handlebars. And so I get home, I cruise home, my bike, and my dad's like, "Well, where'd you get the pad for the handlebars?" Because he was thinking I was a 6-year-old kid, he ripped it off or he didn't get it or anything. So I said, "Well, Mike Cardoza gave it to me." He's like, yeah, why would somebody give you a pad if, just for whatever? And I was like, "Well, it's because I let him ride my bike all around everything after school." And I was like, "What? You let some kid that you don't know take your bicycle?" And I was just thinking, like, yeah, we're friends. I mean, and the great thing is, Cardoza and I are still friends to this day. We've been friends since kindergarten. But there was this thing, and it was a fear, and that's why I say I'm not a professional psychologist, but it's one of the things that you look at in your life, and you're like, man, I don't get why I got to worry about lending my bicycle out to a kid, And as an adult, I could see, thinking everybody's going to steal your bicycle, right? Or if you're a cop and all you deal with is stolen bicycles, and you think somebody loaning a bicycle out is the worst thing could happen because it's obviously can be stolen. And then my personal thing is like, if you're generous and you share things, no one's going to steal off you because you're generous, and they're not going to take advantage of you. And the ones you do, it usually shows up in life. But it only took me like 48 years to process that. A little less, 41, before I really got the full, why was he so pissed off? And so that's why I'm not an expert in psychology, but I have done some psychology, and I'm not an expert on archetypes either. And my Satori one about that is a little more funny. But does that make sense, Jeremy? The ass, grass, or gas? And the bicycle.
My thought is you have a great memory. I don't know if I can remember that far back.
Well, I don't know if you can remember when you're that scared. I guess I was.
I guess that's true. Yeah.
And I was just blown away, because to me, it's like if you had a bicycle and your friend needed to do, and I still, to this day, I get in trouble. The last time I got in trouble is I loaned out our boat to one of my subcontractors without getting permission from the home front. And that turned out worse than the ass, grass, or my ass was grass on that one. So all of these kind of tie together. So my archetype Satori was, and Satori is like an awakening, right? It's not anything. And sometimes you can meditate, you can go on a 3-week retreat, and nothing happens. And another thing about attunement, one of the main things is, well, there's two really. Is one, it's the idea that you've never arrived. So like the attunement process, it's just something you're always going to go through. It's kind of like a lifelong learner value. And the other thing is not to take it too seriously. Like there's some people that are just super expert meditators, like I'm so good. And the idea isn't really to become a great, that's the other reason that Dilettante is awesome, because if you get too much into the practice of attunement, then you're not doing it right. I mean, the really thing is to just awaken, integrate, and then do something, with whatever you've learned, put it into use. So my archetype one is I was doing a 3-day archetype. First class I ever did, it was the Archetypes of Healing at JFK University. And it was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday class. And we come back for like a Monday thing. But on Saturday, halfway through, this instructor kept talking about archetypes and Carl Jung and one of the archetype. And I had to raise my hand on Saturday. And it was one of those things where there's no dumb question, right? Like they say, if you're anything, especially a mastermind, especially something you're trying to, raise everybody's consciousness level. But it had gone too far. because I didn't know what he meant by archetype. So by Saturday, raising my hand, I had to say, what's an archetype? And it was embarrassing, but I thought, man, this is a 3-day class. If I don't ask now, uh, I'm never going to get anything. And I was getting something out of it. There was drumming and there was chanting and there was everything. But, and he gave a really good definition that they're patterns. It's a pattern that are ongoing. And they were more talking about the hero, the masculine and feminine, some of the more popular archetypes, there's hundreds and hundreds. And the hero is the one we see the most in movies. And it's if you could see a symptom of where we're at on the archetypal spectrum as a culture, if you look at the way the superhero movies have taken off, and it's that our culture is infatuated with that hero buff, and now they've added, it's not just buff white guys. There's everything of archetypes for the hero. It's women, it's all different cultures, it's all different everything. And you sometimes see the shadow in the movies, but usually it's the bad guy is the shadow, and then it's the good guy is the hero. So the other thing, I'm not a professional researcher, but I love doing research. So what I love is I can get in conversations with people who are, like, if I see somebody who's they're an expert in transpersonal psychology, or they're expert in, like, I'd love to have a conversation with Jordan Peterson. And he's one of the people, I think he's, when I was in college, it was probably Stephen Covey, because he wrote the 7 Habits, and it was like one of those business books that everybody was reading. And Jordan Peterson, I think, is that, just because he's so popular. You've heard of Jordan Peterson, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, I had a meeting, and it's funny in our business, like, it's like a lot of people haven't heard of Jordan Peterson. I brought this up, and we had a group. There was probably 5 or 6 people, and only one knew. He goes, "Well, I know who he is. I really couldn't tell you anything about it." But he, in his interviews one time, the people he surprises people, because he'll say that we all have this shadow side. And the example, he always uses Hitler as an example. I think that's because he studied Jung so much, that Jung was worried about. And Jordan Peterson, yeah, we all have this shadow side of our personality that if you trigger it, and you think about, like, for me, I think about what I would do if my kids were in danger. Like the list of behaviors on what I think is acceptable, it kind of goes exponential when I think of protecting something that I love, or if I feel threatened. And Jordan Peterson's always like, yeah, you have to deal with that shadow. And he's one of his main criticisms of psychology is that we don't take the shadow seriously. And it really is. And because the subconscious is so much of what we do in life is on autopilot. It's based on our subconscious, unconscious tendencies that, to be able to identify and integrate both the light and shadow types of the archetype is an important skill. So I'm not a professional athlete either. And that goes back to the things, you're either in the stands or on the field. And, my criticism of myself is, even when I'm in the stands and I'm not an athlete, I feel like I'm participating in the game, right? It's like, I know what plays they should be running on first down. I know if they should go for it on fourth down. I know. And, just part of that shadow side of, because I played high school sports, a little bit of junior college, that I'm a expert on it. That's what makes it fun.
You were talking about the shadow, and the shadow of the athlete.
Yeah, so the shadow of the athlete is overtraining, and we talked about a little about that, an integral effort with the saboteur. It's something that it really ended my athletic career. Is, the athlete, there's this value, and watched a special this weekend on Tony Romo, and I'm a big Tony Romo fan. He never won any Super Bowls, and that's kind of what they judge people by in football as a quarterback. It's kind of sad, because you look at people can have an amazing career, set all kinds of records, be an amazing gift to the sport, and then people will judge them based on Super Bowls, which it's a team sport, and then there's a lot of things that have to happen to get to that. But he was talking about as a kid, and I identify so much with this. But he said he had just a passion for practicing, that he would throw football so many times a day, more than anybody else. So a lot of what, he obviously, to be a professional athlete, there's natural gifts you have to have. I mean, certain people, you're not making it in just because of the DNA. But there's this other thing of just constantly practice. And he wanted to do basketball first. So they had a basket. And I was the same way. When I was a kid, I was the best basketball player, kind of because I was a little bit bigger. But I was, if somebody was shooting 10 baskets a day, I was shooting 100 or 1,000. We just sit out there and it would be dark outside. And his folks were saying the same thing. It's midnight, and you hear this dong dong ching, dong dong ching. It's like, hey, Tony, we're trying to sleep in here. So that obsessiveness and the obsessive practice, without good coaching and attunement of your body, it's easy to overtrain. And then the other thing is overconfidence. And I talked a little bit about that already. Confidence is good. I think that's what Jordan Peterson, his rule number 1 of his 12 rules for life is stand up straight with your shoulders back. It's a confidence thing, but it can go, too far. The athlete, just because you're an athlete doesn't mean, you're entitled to anything else, right? It's something for us to admire. And I think as we evolve, and then this is my utopian theory of shooting for the sky. I really, I hope that someday, maybe to my kids' generation, their kids' generation, but the athlete sort of replaces the warrior as an ethic of how we deal with things, because we won't have to kill people so that everybody can get what they want. So that's kind of, for me, it's the highest, but it has to be integrated, and it can't, in order for the athlete to be that, it has to be a balance of that competition, which is another thing. But it's healthy practice, and then balancing with humility and grace. And I think a lot of athletes, it's changed over the years, and you'll still see. I think it's the exception. Most athletes, if you watch a press conference, and I like to watch press conference because journalists are usually good, and they'll try to ask gotcha questions, and they'll know if they got somebody, and then they get them sometimes. Some of these athletes are 20-year-old kids, and they're dealing with journalists who went to school, and that's all they do is to ask gotcha questions, and then they get them sometimes. But I'm usually surprised, like, man, these guys, they're making millions of dollars, gifted bodies, gifted athletes, a lot of success, and then they're mostly, I think there's a lot of humility and grace. It doesn't get highlighted as much as the other ones because it's not as much fun. That's the shadow. The shadow part of the athlete archetype.
Talk about the attunement part. Why does generating attunement, and you talk about this concept of kind of archetypal freedom.
Yeah, so it's like, why does it matter, right? Why do you to do this archetypal practice or do anything? And I think when you embrace some of the shadow and you start to balance some of these things and see it through attunement, and you start to see some of the stories that you tell yourselves on and on, over and over. And then once you recognize those stories, they have less effective on you. So you really can be more authentic. And read the room is a new thing that I'm hearing that people can do. They can read the room or know who you're dealing with. And so it just gives you more access to your whole, person and innovation, and maybe changing the way you approach something. And you get this story about my friend Jam, and the body's like a battery. He has this John L. Mulhar has a PL 365, which is personal lifestyle 365. So he is an expert in like peak training, peak performance. It's funny, the practice is peak performance, but the first module is sleep. It's like, okay, Jam, you're gonna get us here. You're gonna talk about peak performance. We're doing all these things. It's like the number one component of his module, and it's basically like everything's based on sleep, because we're energy, and your body is an instrument for working with energy. Body's full of energy. And jams, we were in it's sort of the word mastermind is the best word to describe it, but I'm trying to think, do you even to mastermind, do you have a better word for like collective intelligence optimization team? Or it's funny because people get the wrong, like, oh, mastermind, I'm going to go to a mastermind, but it's a group of people who are all trying to improve, basically do the attunement process. It's a collective way of doing it. It's very powerful, because everybody, there's usually a leader in a mastermind, but it's the other participants in it who all add something. And the first, it was Napoleon Hill. We keep bringing him up on this podcast. The first time I saw it was in his, he studied the 500 most successful people of the 1900s. And one thing he saw that they had in common is that the other thing I like to call is they had access to distributed cognition. I've heard that as a networking for, it's networking, but what you're doing is you're with other leaders, and you're leading each other. And so everybody's kind of leading everybody. Anyways, you have this thing that your body is a battery. He was saying your body is a battery. And I was challenging him. And so, your body isn't a battery. Your body has a lot of the properties of a battery, but your body is way more. I mean, your whole consciousness is tied to so we did agree. And it's funny, he changes it. So everyone needs to take his PL 365, because it will say the body has all the properties of a battery. And but we basically are energy. I mean, that's Jam's point. And then as instruments, our bodies are full of energy. We're tuned into frequencies. And I mentioned Vicky at the beginning. That's one of the reasons I want to mention Vicky Delajoyo. She's a Qigong master, and she talks about Wei Qi, which is that energy field. When somebody walks into a room, and she trains a lot of speakers, and she trains speakers to own their energy, because there is something, there are good vibes, and everyone's felt bad vibes. There's a person that walks into the room, and you're attracted to them. And then there's also the person that gives off of bad vibes, and it's kind of like, oh, I want to stay away. So Jam and I, we both agree that we are quote unquote energy. And then this idea of integral attunement, it optimizes our potentials on worldview, our vision, our, when you take action. I mean, all the things that we've talked about in the previous the integral speech, is because when you say things, you'll feel something inside. There's a practice where you'll say a word, and then you'll see how you feel. And you're like, wow, I don't feel good saying that, or I'm not gonna. So attunement is this ongoing optimizing, where your energy. The other thing is without awareness of these shadow archetypes, they can take on, you're off to the races in your mind, and that can eat up a lot of your energy. If you have anxiety about stories that you keep telling yourself, and it's because you haven't addressed some of these shadow archetypes, or there's fear, or you're not in the present moment, you're either in the past or the future. And being in an archetypal freedom, meaning you're not going to go with the wavy ups and downs. We kind of talked about that last week. There's cultural ups and downs. Your body has ups and downs. Your moods have up and downs. But if you're in attunement, you're kind of pulling away from that roller coaster and towards your full potential.
Mark, talk about, with all of this, there's a transformation that occurs, or at least a goal of transformation. So talk about creating that. We're giving the opportunity to create that transformation.
So creating the container, and I'm going to read this Zen poem, and I've had a few of these. I haven't always, but I typed this. I was looking for a poem for this part of explain, because the idea of container, creating the possibility, and this is kind of like your worldview is like creating a container. But I wanted to read this poem, and the thing about Zen poems or koans is that they're like unsolvable riddles, and then they're really just meant to ponder and sit and wait for an opening. And like my koan for me personally, and writing this work is why is there such a huge gap between human potential and the human condition? You want to see what people are capable of, and then when you walk around the world, you look around, and you're like, man, there's garbage everywhere. Everyone's pissed off. We have all these, we could be loaning our bicycles to each other, right? And trading funny stickers. But when I wrote this, there was an airplane buzzing overhead while I typed. My mind set free in the Dharma realm. I sit at a moon-filled window, watching the mountains with my ears, hearing the stream with open eyes. Each molecule preaches perfect law. Each moment chants true sutra. The most fleeting thought is timeless. A single hair is enough to stir the sea. And that's written by Shutaku. It's like 1300. So he lived in the 14th century. And it's from a book of poetry, Let the Spring Breeze Enter. And to me, hearing with your eyes it's opening up a set of possibilities. And it reminds me when I hope you introduce me to somebody who's has been sightless since they were born. They're still accomplishing amazing things. And to me, that's somebody I think is hearing with their eyes. They're seeing with their ears. They're creating a container for what's possible. And I'm talking about Dr. Hobie that you introduced me, and I hope he's going to be on future shows, and it's going to be real soon. We didn't connect last week, but we'll connect this week. But creating, that poem, it doesn't make any sense, but it makes all the sense in the world if you open up to it. And a single hair is enough to stir the sea. It's kind of the same thing as the butterfly effect. And is the butterfly effect a movie, or is it?
Yeah, it's a movie. Yeah.
So it's a movie, and I haven't seen the movie, but we got in an argument. It's funny, any more of these arguments can be solved by Google, but I was at a rock concert and I said, no, butterfly effect. It's like a scientific thing that the wind from the wings of a butterfly can actually cause like a tornado somewhere else. Have you heard it like that?
I haven't heard like that. No, just that it could change the course of something else that's like a ripple effect.
The ripple effect. And that's what, and so I think the butterfly effect movie, it uses some idea of that ripple effect, but there is a thing, and I'm not an expert on it, but the butterfly effect is actually the wind from, that small, but it is the ripple effect. And in those pond, when you drop a pebble in a pond, it ripples out. But that's the idea of, creating a container. And it's more, the first thing about the container is with transformational. And we talked a little bit the last podcast that we did, and I'm losing in what we were talking about. But it does talk about, it's more of an emptying. It's not a bunch of more knowledge. I mean, there's so much knowledge out there. If you just keep adding to what you think it's education. And I think this is a JFK quote, but education is the fanning of a flame. It's not the filling of a vessel, or it's not the filling of a vessel. It's the fanning of a flame. And that transformational container, you're not trying to add more to this container of knowledge, that there's just so much. And some of this in these Satori moments, like the big things that will come to people. And I've read a lot about these. I've had on share, and I was just going to share a few of what that emptying process for me is. It usually comes in the form of, man, I need to forgive somebody for something. I mean, my first, there's this thing, it's funny in Freudian, and again, I'm not a psychologist, but I've studied for a long time. Like the whole Freudian psychotherapy was, he figured out that everybody was messed up because of their parents. So then it was like, you go to Friday psychotherapy, you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm just the way I am because my parents are that way. It's proven this, but the funny thing, Freud, he discovered the subconscious, but none of his, like, none of his practices or anything or therapies have proven to work. Like he discovered what's going on. But then, so the new thing is instead of blaming your for you're like, oh, I figured it out. And then every time you go to Thanksgiving, you're like, hey, look it, I'm just like this because you're like this. And it's true because any family now, it's funny because I'm the dad. It's not, it's thank God I have the clown archetype because it wouldn't be as funny because I look at my kids and there's a lot of good things they're emulating. They do all the good stuff, but the little ticks and the little I'll never forget coming home from work one time and looking and like, man, like why are all these shoes just scattered all over the ground in the front of the front foyer? As at the same time I'm kicking off my shoes and kind of flicking them into the corner. I said, did you really just say that? But the transformation container is that you find these things and you say, well, this is just the way things turned out because this happened in my life, or this explains it, so I'm just like that. So transformation, instead of just accepting the way things turned out the way they are, a lot of it has to do with, and the things that have come to me in silent trees, it's like, wow, I need to forgive my parents. Why did why would I have any resentment towards my folks? My story, everybody has a different story. Um, and in a lot of ways, because I was an athlete, I thought I had it, not all of this stuff mattered, but um, I had my dad on the podcast, but we went through eras where things, that picture wasn't so rosy. Uh, my dad lost his dad at a really young age. When I turned 18, I got injured. I wasn't getting the sports scholarship. My dad had always said, no matter what, even though my mom and him had been divorced since I was like 2, he'd pay for my college. And then my dad got sick when I went to college, and nothing really happened. Kind of got in a fight with my mom, took me off the insurance the day I turned 18, even though I was still in high school, and then never helped me with school. So I was kind of pissed, right? I mean, as a kid would be. And I was an athlete, so I thought I was entitled. all the all of the things were working, but I was pissed, and I'm not talking about like for a month or 90 days or anything. There were 10-year periods in my life, where I wasn't really on good terms with my dad. And there came to a point where it's like I'm holding on to all this stuff, and it's not doing me any good. It's not doing my dad any good. And the way my dad kept the relationship open is he had this dirty jokes emails that he would send. There was like, and it's I always kind of put that down, like, oh really, this is the best way you can stay in touch with your kid. But it kept the door open, so it wasn't like the communication was closed. It was only going one way. And it's funny, the only time I ever reacted to it was, and this was years ago, this was when Bill Clinton must have been running for president or something in that era, and there was some political thing about the Kennedys. And it was like, now that I'm older and I see like these political things just fly back and forth, and they're pretty much, you can jump at any time and everybody's sending them. But I thought this was like a specific thing directed, and I just jumped on it, and I killed my dad. And it was that was probably 20 years ago. And my political views have probably changed 180 degrees since then. But I gave just kind of a good response, for like somebody who just graduated for college. And my dad was just kind of like, wow, like it's not that big of a deal. It wasn't serious. Like these are just jokes. We're just sending it back and forth. You didn't have to take the bait. But I did when I finally talked to my dad, and I was like, man, you just left me, and I had to do everything on my own. And why didn't you give me more help? And my dad he just went, wow. He goes, man, he goes, I thought you had it. He goes, well, I always just thought you could take care of it. And it hit me because I was thinking in my life, that's all I ever wanted, was for people to think that I had it. And here I'm resenting this guy. He's my dad. And he was going, you had it. Like I got sick. I couldn't help you. And you had it. So I find it, I still get emotional. I thought I could tell the story and just laugh about it, but so I had the thing is about forgiving my dad. I had to forgive myself first, and that's the hardest thing because I was like, "What the fuck? Forgive myself for what? What did I did it all. I went to school. I got 3 jobs. I did like I'm gonna for like here." And so whenever you get into this, why am I gonna forgive myself? It's like, oh, forgive myself for acting like this, for going 10 years. And so that was the biggest thing I had to forgive myself is like, why did I wait 10 years to clear the air, to forgive myself uh for doing it however I did. And that was kind of because I did it the way I did it. I was kind of a rogue, right? I didn't take shit from anybody because I had the shadow side of the archetype, the pissed off my parents. Freud gave me permission because at that time, and in my defense, in that time, I had only studied Freud. It's like your parents are the problem. And so the other one I've had a big one recently is that I had my aunt, we were restrained when my grandmother passed away. There was a big thing happened with our family. This is another thing, like things happen in generations and it makes no sense whatsoever at all. But it's like when everything's going smooth, people are having Christmas parties and everybody keeps showing up, but something bad happens. Somebody gets sick, somebody dies, and my grandmother, who, my grandparents are the most like, I look up to them. I put them on a pedestal. And I'd say my grandfather was the wealthiest man I ever knew. And it's not because he had money. It's just because of the kind of person he was. He was generous. Like he would have loaned out his bicycle. My grandpa wouldn't have been mad at me because he grew up through the Depression. They grew their own food. They had access. So my aunt, and things happened when my grandmother died, and there was confusion about who was supposed to take over. But anything, our family kind of divided in this thing, and my aunt was on one side of it, and I really blamed her for all of it, right? And well, you're supposed to be running this thing. I tried to help her, but she's thinking Marky, the 18-year-old college pot smoker, not Marky, the 40-year-old business owner, mastermind owner, president of Warehouse Education Research Council of Attorneys, everything. I could have helped her, but she didn't really look at it, so I resented her. And again, it was 10 years. And there was a few years ago. I think it was right before I haven't thought of my favorite word for the pandemic, but the Panini press. Right before the Panini press, I did a 3-day. It was a 5-day retreat and opening and creating this container, right? Because in the container for 10 years, the idea of making a place for my aunt or forgiving. And then the other thing is I couldn't forgive myself because again, I was like, forgive myself from what? I did everything. I and I got in that same thing. But we took a situation that was impossible. I mean, nobody in our family would have said, Mark, and my aunt's name is Jeanette. They never would have said these two people are going to come together and then they're going to find a way. And, really, again, through a process of self-forgiveness. And it's like, well, forgive myself for what? And I went through a year and you can write letters. That's one of the things in this part of this workshop is you take a person that you were, that you really should be. I should have been in a relationship with my aunt. She was my hero when I was young. She wrote a book about me when I was 5 years old. She always, she gave me that knight in shining armor archetype to live up to. And there was there was a lot of bad shit that happened with our family. But the thing is, I had a part in that. My mindset, it was open. And again, I waited 10 years. The biggest thing I had to forgive myself for was like, why did I wait so long? And why did I not give her a chance? Like, that's the other thing. You write these letters and you give it to the people and they look at the letter and they're like, no, this isn't an apology. It's like, it's the apologist like, well, I'm sorry that you're such a loser, that you make me so angry. For a lot of people, that substitutes for an apology, right? Is just saying, well, I'm afraid, I'm sorry you make me act that way. And so it was one of the things I'm most proud of in my life. And my aunt is we have a really good reputation or relationship. We don't have a great reputation in our family, but we will have a great reputation. And there's even, she's estranged from her kids and everything, and they really don't want to have anything to do with her. But, I'm hopeful that our relationship, and it's been about a year that I've been talking to her. I called her, and she's 80 years old. That's the thing. She's all alone too. So for a lot of me, it was compassion, right? It's like, I have to make this work because I don't want this person who was such a great, she made a great contribution to my life. And I don't want, just because this, everything didn't work out with my grandma, and she didn't do things the way anybody wanted her to. And really, nobody's seen things from her perspective. Like, she felt like she had no choice than to do things this way. Her knight in shining armor archetype took over because she looked at this as a container for what she'd done her whole life. It's like, I'm going to have to keep doing this my whole life. This is what happened. My parents gave me a situation that was unsolvable, and now I have to solve it my way. And, I didn't see it that way 10 years ago, but it has generated. And then when you make those, phone calls and the letters, and Vicky, but when I asked Vicky Dilettante, she had a similar situation with her father. And she shared very powerfully on the podcast that she wrote a letter, and she was working with a professional who helps people, reconcile with their parents. And she kept giving the letter for a year. I mean, here's a master energy teacher, Qigong expert, enlightened martial artist master, like somebody, you go in her presence, you automatically fall in love. But when it came to writing a letter for her dad and the person she was working with, it took a year because she would give it to her. She's like, okay, I wrote it as a good apology. This lady was like, no, this isn't. You're still blaming your dad for the reason you're the way you are. And so it, doing that's like, why do that? Because there's this huge opening. It's an opening for me where I was closed, where I was just kind of in and protecting myself. There's an opening. And the other relationship that I've had to, work with to repair is my old boss. When I started my company, he was really pissed off. And because I was the golden child, I was leading sales, and I've shared the story on other podcasts, so I won't go into it, but he felt like there was a betrayal. And I always saw where he was coming from. The way I tried to leave, I didn't take a bunch of clients with me. All the projects that I had going, a lot of people in our business, if they're going to start a new company or they're a contractor or anything, like about 60 to 90 days or 6 months before they quit, they'll start moving deals over to their new company. And I did the opposite of that. I said, anything I have going, anything I quoted, there were only 2 months. That's the other thing. It took me 2 months to start my own company. I said, in these 2 months, I'm closing every single deal. I'm collecting all, because you didn't get paid till you collected too. So I was in the collection. There was some self-serving, but I'm going to do everything the right way. And when I left, I gave him a list. I said, here's everything I'm quoting. It was $300,000 worth of deals. But even with all that, he was still, and it took us about 8 years. And I think he finally went to a 3. No, actually, he didn't go to a 3-day retreat. Here's the thing. And I'm going to have Ross. His name is Ross Clark. He's one of my best mentors I've ever had. But they had because there were other employees there. I was friends with a lot of employees there. I mean, I was there for 8 years. We went on vacations together. We did masterminds together. We built businesses together. And they wanted to be able to do projects with me, because there were things hey, I set this up to where we could be collaborators and not really competitors. And it took 8 years, and my boss invited me to lunch, and I'd send them emails on Thanksgiving. Yeah, that's what you do too. And I'll give people, here's a hint. If there's somebody you need to write a letter to, do it at Thanksgiving and do it gratitude. I've talked about gratitude on that. Like, whoever you're pissed off at and they matter. And like, if somebody doesn't matter, they don't matter, but whatever. But if it's a parent, and Ross was kind of like a father figure. He was a boss. He was a mentor. As a parent, if it's somebody that's important, Thanksgiving is a good time to just list off the things you're thankful for that person. So I did a few Thanksgivings, and they got rebuffed, but he finally invites me to lunch, and I wanted to know, and I was going to ask the question, like, what was your Satori moment, right? What was your Satori moment? And I said, let me guess. You had your strategic committee meeting, and there's 5 people, and they voted 3-2 that you should have lunch with me. He goes, I'm not going to say And I go, and you voted no. And he said, because I'm not gonna say anything, but that's pretty much what happened. Everybody else said, we got to do this. And then to his credit, he's the type of leader, authentic leader. If his team says this is a good idea, even though it wasn't his idea, he stepped in, he did it, we've reconciled, and now we meet. We try to meet once a quarter, but it's funny, things get going so good that it's usually twice a year that we meet. And I've got a lunch scheduled with them next week, so I'm looking forward to it.
Mark, I know we're right at the time, so this is great. We'll definitely pick up this conversation on the next episode, but thanks for sharing all those stories. For me, it was valuable. Hopefully everyone listening is valuable as well. And on the integral attunement, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Tao of Pizza podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.